So, if information is coded emotionally, what factors influence the code? How do we develop a child who has a positive disposition towards school? Well, in a place like Renbrook, there aren't 3 R's, there are 4 R's. A child not well known is a child not well taught. Because relationships are part of the equation, a critical part of the equation. Teachers who know kids, who know them as children who can learn, who know them as good learners in some subjects, and learners who need more challenge or support in other subjects. Teachers who know them as members of families, teachers who know their students as members of social groups, and know the child's relative position in the social group, and can help a child mediate their position in a social group. It's all part of creating an environment that is high challenge and nurture and low anxiety. Because any anxiety impedes learning. It impedes the actual learning and it impedes the emotional response to challenge. Social anxiety especially impedes learning. Schools that foster, remember manners? Oh my gosh, manners? When Greenwich Country Day School kids would come back from high school, many of the kids who went to Greenwich High, which is a great school in many ways, would say to me that the thing that was difficult for them was the way the kids talked to the teachers. They had a very difficult time with that. Because in a school like Renbrook, a teacher is, teachers are not just appreciated here, they're revered here, appropriately so. Okay, and then you get into resilience. And what we know about resilience is that resilience is a function of many things, but primarily 2. One of them is the presence of loving, caring adults in a child's life who help them understand that failure is always a temporary condition, on the path to whatever final achievement is your goal. So, resilient kids have internalized a definition of success and failure that is not focused on peak moments, like you got a good grade, so you're a success. Resilient kids are focused on success as continuous, steady progress. Think of the damage we do to kids with certain types of grading systems. Public school grading system, which I was not able to undermine as much as I tried when I was a public school superintendent. Students in school today, the kids here, the kids in your homes, they are neurologically different from any other generation in history. We know, we can see it. You can see it from MRIs. They are neurologically different. They are neurologically different from their parents and their teachers. Now that's changing, but we're still in a transition period where children have had early, sustained experience with technology, powerful experience with technology, that's actually created a differently configured brain. Okay, kids today are accustomed to learning things on their own and learning from peers. So a year ago, I bought my 8-year-old grandson an iPad. And my son, who's a techie, he loaded the iPad with a lot of interesting things. No video games. Okay? So I knew he had some things that would be approvable by his mother and his teachers. But a year later, this Christmas, Max wanted to show Granddad stuff he's doing on his iPad. So I'm watching this stuff and I'm thinking, my gosh, he's 9. It's a 9-year-old. Some pretty interesting, complicated things that he is doing with this iPad. So I said to him, Max, did you learn this in school? He said, no, actually, this I learned from Matthew. So I'm thinking, okay, well, Matthew, I know my daughter hires college kids as babysitters. I figured Matthew is probably a kid at Penn, senior, technology major, babysitting my 9-year-old grandson. I said, oh, you learned that from Matthew. Who's Matthew? He lives across the street. I said, oh, really? How old is Matthew? He's 12, Granddad. This is the world they're living in. I mean, there was a time when knowledge was controlled by Roman Catholic monks. Okay? Fast forward, access to knowledge, all forms of knowledge and all kinds of access becoming more and more ubiquitous. And more avenues, and more kids learning on their own and learning from each other. Okay, so what happened in America? Okay, what drove me out? I remember the day it all changed. February 6, 1992. This was the day the New York Times published this story. And it shocked Americans. It was like the Sputnik when the Russians were ahead of us in science. We could not believe that we were in the bottom half of the sample. Okay, and everything changed. Public education became primarily about test scores. Now, the scandal in all of this is not that American public schools were that bad or are that bad. They're not. The scandal in this is child poverty. I've spent time in Finland, okay? Love the schools in Finland, okay? But the schools in Finland, those kids that take this test, Finland has a 2% poverty rate. So 2% of the test takers are living in poverty. What percent of the test takers in the American sample are living in poverty? 23%. You don't think that's going to have an effect? So how do we respond? We respond by giving kids. This is our response. Okay, educators didn't choose this. Legislators chose this solution. This is a solution chosen by the National Governors Association. Okay, people who study public school classrooms. Recall. Recall. That's what we're doing. You know what? It's not just a mind-numbing day for the kids. It's pretty mind-numbing for the faculty as well. Okay, now, you know what? When you take medicine, when you take medicine, the law requires that there be warning on what the side effects are, okay? But we now have a retro educational system in America, and we don't have the warnings attached. I know what the warnings are. I know what they should be, okay? But they're printed in this report. March 2014, State of Our Schools. Gallup, the polling organization, this is the largest study Gallup has done on any topic ever. Gallup interviewed hundreds of thousands of teachers all across America, hundreds of thousands of kids, hundreds of thousands of parents. Google it. It's fascinating. Okay, so what's the side effect? Almost half of the kids they surveyed are disengaged in school. Okay, what's the side effect to that? This is where I started my career, Cherry Hill East High School. I went on their website, took a screenshot. What shocks me is they only list 2 administrators. They list Lawyer Chapman, the building principal. Look who's listed below him. When half of your student body at the high school level is disengaged, guess what happens? Bullying has reached epidemic proportions in American public schools. Of course it would. Okay, the other definition of student engagement. Essential questions are really, they are central questions in a school like Renbrook. Okay, when you've got kids, 12-year-olds, walking around with the Library of Congress in their pants, okay, maybe it's time to have kids develop a different relationship with information. And that relationship is, let's focus on essential questions. Yes, at Renbrook, they're still answering who, when, where, or what, but there's also a high degree of concentration on why, how, and what if. Okay, teacher engagement. The next slide is, I didn't Photoshop this. I took this from the website. Gallup asked hundreds of thousands of teachers the question, are you still engaged in your work? Do you find it meaningful and rewarding? This is the Gallup slide. You can Google it. Does that take your breath away? Did all these people choose the wrong profession? Or did the profession get hijacked by people outside the profession? Okay, let me wrap up by saying we actually know what our kids will be challenged by and with, and the skills they will need in the future. Why? Because we have think tanks, we have businesses contributing to knowledge on the future, and you have organizations like this that have studied future work skills. And what we know now is this chart continues to grow. Most professional work in the future is going to be non-routine cognitive, interactive. The word is not on here. What does that mean? It means that no matter what you do, it's going to be different all the time. Okay, forget routines. You know, no matter what you do, there's no more routine. It's going to be non-routine. It's going to be intellectual. You're going to have to be thinking, responding, adapting. You're going to have to be willing and able to adapt. And it's going to be interactive, meaning your partners, your collaborators are going to be people all over the world. Remember the scourge of AIDS? Remember HIV, how awful it was? An epidemiologist said, you know, it'll take us 100 years to turn this from a death sentence into a long-term chronic disease. It took 15 years. Why? Because every research finding in the world was immediately shared with every other researcher in the world. So the Louis Pasteur Institute, as soon as they had a discovery, they made sure Stanford, Duke University, you know, Sloan Kettering, they made sure everybody else had that discovery. Massive worldwide collaboration. HIV is still a lousy disease. It's not a death sentence because the future is about collaborating, okay? And if that's the case, then here, this is what the future of work will be. Flatter organizations, fewer bosses, more peers trying to understand perspectives. And the bottom, a high value will be placed on IQ is what you know, it's cognitive information. EQ is your ability to apply your knowledge persuasively, powerfully, to think with other people, to plan and dream and solve with other people. You know, there's no more Joan of Arc heroes anymore. Go it alone. You know, the Lee Iacocca's, you know, all of these high-profile company leaders, that's the past. The future will be teams of people. Carnegie Institute, they do a lot of studying on the future of work. Harvard. But here's the current day dilemma. What's this all about? This should have been a chilling event. Front page of the Wall Street Journal, June of 2016. The path from Harvard and Yale to Goldman Sachs just changed. You know what that means? Parent at Greenwich Country Day School, who I've kept in touch with, is involved in recruitment for a major investment banker. And what they have said is they're not interviewing at the Ivy League anymore because they're not getting the quality, the qualities they're looking for. Okay, what are they getting? They're getting the kids who have played an old-fashioned system as well as it can be played. These are kids who are highly successful in a correct answers challenge. Okay? So the valedictorian of the past is no longer the valedictorian of the future. We're looking for a generation of Bill Gateses, Steve Jobs, individuals, iconoclasts, thinkers, collaborators. Okay, and also on this, remember this? Okay, here's Sir Ken Robinson. Content-based education, that's education that can be measured by Scantron. Content-based education increases routines of behavior, habits of thought, decreases divergent thinking. So you have a kid growing up in a intense, high-pressure, high-stakes, content-based, recall, lower-level knowledge environment. and you in fact are having a kid who has not had an important 21st century part of the brain stimulated. Now, anybody know what this is? Anybody see this? I've got like one more slide. This is a billboard on a highway in San Diego. It's across from a rest area, so you could pull over, okay? Because some people pulled over. And the people who pulled over, either they wrote this down or they took a photograph of it, and they went home and they solved the equation. And the solution to the equation is a website. So when they keyboarded the website, guess what happened? Guess what happens when you solve this equation and keyboard the website? We'd like to interview you. So Google is not going to Princeton anymore. They're picking people off the highway in San Diego because that's what they're looking for. If that's what they're looking for, then you need kids who have had early, sustained experience in essential questions, powerful relationships, places where they are known, cared about, places that teach kids how to think collaboratively. Let me just finish by saying that one of my buddies was asked to take over the evaluation function at his company, where he was going to evaluate the company. So we went out to dinner and he's telling me about this. It's a big company, he's got to come up with an evaluation system for the company. So I don't know what to tell him. This is PepsiCo. So he said, well, Doug, how do you evaluate Greenwich Country Day School? You're the headmaster, big fancy school. At the end of the year, how do you determine whether it's been a good year or not? And I said, well, there's an answer that I don't know how to share this publicly because people might think it's sarcasm. Not that there's anything wrong with sarcasm, occasionally. But I said, actually, the real answer is I care less about what my kids know on graduation day and more about what they still want to know. I care more that the school has taken the natural curiosity of a child and expanded it and developed it and made a kid be tenacious about it. And I care about the quality of their kindness and how they treat other people. But I care mostly about whether we in fact have expanded their curiosity. You live in Greenwich for many years. You see life lived as well as it can be lived materially. And I knew families in Greenwich that were very happy, very rich and very happy. I knew a lot of families that were very rich and were not so happy. And I think one of the differences were people like Ron Howard. Ron Howard, the movie director? Classic example of somebody who is rich, very happy father and husband, very happy community member. So what makes Ron Howard so happy? Ron Howard is a guy with a million interests. He's interested in birds, he's interested in the stars, he's interested in people's faith, he's interested in music, he's interested in art. My sense has always been that the people who have the best lives on this planet are not the people who have the most comforts, but they are the people who have the most interests. Because those people are rarely bored, they're rarely lonely, their interests give them, continuing supply of people who share their interests. And I think it's the recipe for a good life, but it starts young. And it starts successfully in places like this. I do feel, I love my country. I do wish that a Renbrook experience was a right of American citizenship. I wish there was a solution to the bureaucratizing of public education. And I left when I thought it wouldn't happen in my lifetime. I had 3 little kids. I now have 4 grandchildren. So I'll pay for my beliefs in terms of tuition checks and be happy to do so. Thank you.